Glad to have everybody here. Welcome to the show, Progressive Farming, with our host, Evan Folds. This is episode 13. Next week, there won't be an episode. Evan's got a family reunion, so he's going to go hang out with the family, which is far better than working. But so anyway, next week's no show, but you can get all the previous episodes or view all of the previous episodes. No, the last 3 episodes on YouTube. The Permethos YouTube channel or tv.permethos.com. You can also subscribe to the podcast if you just want to listen, which is a little difficult to do for this show. You really want to enjoy the visuals because there's a lot of good visuals. But if you prefer audio, there it is. You can get it on the podcast. So tv.permethos.com. Check us out on YouTube or on Facebook. There's the Progressive Farm web Facebook page. All right, Evan, let's dive in, man. Good to have you again.
Thank you, sir. Let's do it. So, hey, everybody. It's a continuation of last week, sorry. Got a lot to say on this subject. It's something I've been playing with for 15 years and won't ever get figured out. But that's really kind of the draw and the good part. I think a lot of farming is letting go. It's not for the analytical mind. One of the chuckles I always got in my retail store days was when you got the architect trying to set up a square foot garden, and they grid it off and they've spaced the plants perfectly and it looks beautiful, and then the way it grows completely frustrates them, right? Because there's an element of control and understanding of what goes where, and things that don't fit like a glove with modern science, let's say. Modern science is very well equipped to make their minds up that they have proven something, and they have words like law that are made to be broken, right? But part of my experience, and I would say in some respects expertise at this point, is to keep an open mind about these things. There's a lot that's brought up that undermines the potential of what we would want. And part of that is the compost tea conversation. Just for example, a lot of the biological products on the market select certain microbes that perform specific functions, and there's a very good place for that. We talked about this last week, and my approach is always diversity and kind of the unknown unknowns, if you will, right? There's a lot about the soil food web that we don't know. Da Vinci back in the 1500s was telling us that we know more about the stars than we do the soil, more or less. And to this day, I think that's pretty much still the case. And it's not for lack of trying. So not a judgment, just a recognition that the further we look, the less we know in this sphere. So with that setup, I wanted to just kind of start off with an example. This study was done, and it simulated nitrogen pollution, meaning the use of artificial nitrogen fertilizers, to be more direct, over a 25-year period. And the results show that it wasn't only that the artificial fertilizers, typically artificial fertilizers aren't killing anything. They're not toxic themselves. Now, I digress. I can't carry that burden of proof, and I wouldn't doubt it if they were. But on paper, they're not, right? Just try to go check the inert ingredients in some of those products, and maybe you'll know what I mean. The EPA doesn't mandate disclosure of what's in inert ingredients. But the point being, generally speaking, fertilizers aren't directly toxic. What they do is bypass the purpose of soil. They grow plants. They treat the soil like a big hydroponic system, in a sense. That it's inert, and we've got to grow the plants that are rooted in it. And so what this study's showing is the results not only of defeating the purpose of soil on some level, but the result of the fungi that were there in this study and their ability to cycle. It did mitigate the cycling capacity and maturity of soil. It was moving soil in the direction opposite that it wants to move through its natural succession. So, think about what's happening to your lawn or your garden over time, or your farm. The majority of farms use anhydrous ammonia and prop plants up for yield, and it's fast food. And over time, things degenerate, the pests get stronger, and the diseases get more pronounced. And it creates a difficulty that I think is kind of coming to a head. I think agriculture is looking for a new direction, and my hopes are that it's a renaissance, that we start looking at more regenerative practices from a top down. How far the USDA will move in that direction is anybody's guess. They haven't proven to be very flexible in the past, but there's a lot of people making a lot of noise and showing a lot of evidence that, the principles that we discuss in webinars like this and grassroots efforts are entirely relevant and not only work better, but are cheaper. I work for a company that works on a global scale called Vega Labs, and they, one of the things that we're posturing towards is to be able to sell profit. If you use a product, you should be able to measurably show the payback. Problem with conventional farming is that you're basically managing your symptoms. You're not making any sort of progress at all in mitigating your costs. And some levels you're getting the same yields, but you're paying more to hold the problems back. And that can only last for so long. In that respect, you start looking at how much nitrogen fertilizer is used over time. And, to some extent, there's a ceiling in this because there's only so much farmland, right? So you're kind of seeing that as in the leveling off of the more recent years. This only goes up to 2010. You did get a spike there, and I'm looking at more of the averages. But it's safe to say that looking at data like this, we've been giving soil a harder time over time. And what Compost Tea represents is a way to kind of reverse that cycle, the vicious cycle of degeneration. And so that, to kind of put this into some common sense terms, just to show you how simple it is for us to figure this out and how difficult it is for agriculture. And one of the problems being scale. When you're managing 100,000 acres, it's really difficult not to automate it and take the path of least resistance. And that's a lot of the compromise that brought us to the conundrum that I was just describing. But make the connection. 80% of the air is nitrogen. There's nitrogen fixing bacteria all in compost tea and in healthy soil. You don't have to fertilize a forest or a prairie. And I'm not suggesting that a farmland is ever going to perform the way a natural living system will be. Agriculture is an adulterated process. It disrupts the natural ecosystem. Our efforts should be in maintaining that tact to the best of our ability and feeding what regenerates the soil's capacity to do more for us. And it's really as simple as that. So one of the residual benefits, for example, of the many that are available that we talked a lot about last week is, the idea that you get fertilizer for free from the air. Sounds too simple, and it's not. When we do soil testing in our fertility management services, we don't even look for nitrogen because we make certain assumptions around the fact that we're growing the soil's capacity, treating it biologically. Now, admittedly, there's a bridge there. If you just cut your plants off in dead soil and expect tea to support it and regenerate it in the time frame that you want that season, it won't happen. And ideally, you seek out an organic fertilization capacity, and within that, you're growing the soil while providing the nourishment to the plant, and then you can wean yourself off of it. A lot of farmers choose to do that with artificial materials. It takes longer. It doesn't mitigate the benefit completely that you're undertaking, but it doesn't help you either. So that's really, in my book, what organics comes down to. It's not about healing the earth. That's obviously very important and a residual benefit, but this thing has got to work and it's got to be cost effective. So the question is, how do we make farming more profitable? And the answer is to grow the soil's capacity to be soil. There's nothing that does that better than compost tea. So we talked about what it was last week. This week I want to talk a little bit more about how to do it and some of the methods and brewers and things of that nature, and then give you some visuals of how it's worked and some examples of ingredients and recipes and things like that. So the methods are laid out here. I'm going to talk about each one individually. Anaerobic tea is like manure tea. My grandmother always tells me that her dad, my great-grandfather, steeped manure in a bucket and spread it out on fields. And it's not an uncommon practice to this day in some places. And people make comfort tea, nettle tea. There was some questions about that last week. That is an anaerobic process. Anaerobic means without air. Aerobic means with air. The word compost tea has limitations. I think it's I think it's a bad name. It's just what's stuck, right? So we're going to work with what we got. But the word compost tea tends to cover the whole spectrum, and people believe that they're making compost tea by doing anaerobic processes, or extractions and these kinds of things. I like to call it what it is. Actively aerated compost tea is the epitome of growing microbes. Extraction is simply that. You're extracting microbes out of an existing humus source. And anaerobic processes really don't involve proactive inoculation. They can. You can get, EM and Grokashi and different brands that make, lactobacillus microbes that are specifically for anaerobic decomposition. You might make the connection with like dog waste recyclers or kitchen composters. The composting mechanism there is anaerobic without air. You're not turning it. And you're just basically cycling the nutrients out of the material, cutting down odors. You're going to end up with a nutrient relevant solution at the end, or material at the end, same way you would in aerated approaches. But it's not going to be as valuable biologically to the soil. Just to keep it simple, you might end up with the same nutritional profile. The anaerobic tea gives you the nutrients extracted from the raw organic matter you started with, in the same way actively aerated compost tea does the same. So say they're the same. The difference is the spectrums of microbes that are doing the work. In soil, we want aerobic organisms because soil's porous. That's why we turn a compost pile. Tends to be more pathogens residing in the anaerobic tea. Doesn't mean that is defined by pathogenic activity. Just happens to be where more pathogens operate. And typically it's because you have anaerobic conditions within an aerobic posture. And that's, think of feedlot at a CAFO farm. You've got 1,000 cows on an acre, manure sitting there, building up, and there's a lack of aerobic capacity, and the microbes that are challenged to do the work are the anaerobic type that create the sulfur cycling that creates the odors and all of those sorts of things. Pathogens run unchecked because there's nothing to balance them out in the feedlot example, and the end result is that contaminates food and gives the whole concept a bad name. That's a lot of what we're living in. I mentioned last week the limitations of the molasses conversation and how labs test molasses to grow aerobic E. coli without any competition, and therefore people make their mind up that molasses isn't beneficial. So there's a lot of nuance with this, and the lack of attention and intention towards being legitimate within the capacity and potential of aerated compost tea creates a difficult environment for it to live in. And that's more interesting than it is manageable, because on some level you can't change that expectation. You can't carry that burden of proof. A lot of us are looking to do our own thing, not necessarily follow the rules, right? So point here is just kind of create some framework. So this anaerobic method is kind of like what you see here. This image is kind of cool. This was a guy in New Jersey that was pulling all those weeds out of his yard, putting them in a drum, filling it with water, and then he was creating an anaerobic extraction. He was killing the weeds. He was extracting the nutrients from the weeds, and he was steeping it. So he'd pull 5 gallons, 10 gallons off a week and add 5, 10 gallons more water, and he kept the mother going, right? And it hit me as brilliant when I saw this, because, what better way to extract what the landscape needs than to concentrate the fertility spectrum of the weeds. Weeds are growing to account for deficiencies in the soil. Dandelion's always the example that comes to mind first. It grows for calcium. So if you don't have calcium deficiencies in your soil, rarely do you see dandelions growing aggressively. They're there to pull calcium up from the subsoil and die seasonally to regenerate the deficiencies in the topsoil in order for the soil to mature itself. That succession plan is all nature knows, and it's moving to mature itself. So, our effort is to try not to discourage that best we can. So anaerobic methods are extraction of nutrition through anaerobic microbes that are everywhere, and just to make it plain, you generally don't have to go out and it's kind of like if you leave, bread ingredients on a table, some form of microbe comes to begin to leaven it and create that process of making the bread out of it. With anaerobic teas, most people don't go seeking microbes to do that. They just kind of deal with what's there, and what's there is going to populate to the extent to cycle it down, which is its job, into nutritional relevance. So assuming that's understood, the next capacity of compost tea conversation is extraction. This is what a lot of people get out of their worm bins, where you got a tap on it, or if you got a base of your compost bin that catches a moisture or liquid that runs through it. Generally, that's the moisture of the nitrogen inputs, the fresh inputs that you're adding to the material. And that moisture is relevant nutritionally. Whether you need to dilute it or not would depend on your food sources, but typically people do. But it's good for your plants. Does have relevant aerobic microbes in it if it's a healthy composting application. But there's no effort to grow the microbe at all. It's just what what comes out in the liquid. Microbes hold on really tight. I always tell people brush them off our teeth. You know, when we brush our teeth, we brush the microbes off and we don't get them all. So, you know, the idea that you're getting a full complex of microbes, and we'll say some don't hold on more than others. Nobody really knows. Can't get down there and interview them, right? So, you know, the bottom line is there's benefit to this solution that comes out of your compost or your worm bin, but you haven't done anything to grow that capacity beyond what the compost can deliver. So better than, you know, not using it, but it's not the epitome of what you can get out of it. And within extraction, you have passive extraction and active extraction. Passive extraction is the description I've given you already with the worm bin or the compost bin. Active extraction is something that I run into with large-scale farmers because they're piqued by the efficiency of the production. You can take a certain volume of compost and run water through it to physically, actively extract the nutrition and the microbes from that humus source. And you can make 1,000 gallons in an hour or whatever, you know, capacity your pump will move the water through. So to a farmer thinking, well, I don't even have to wait a day, I don't have to brew it and wait, that kind of thing, it seems convenient. What's being glossed over is the population of microbes you get out of an active extraction versus actively aerated compost tea. They're really not comparable. So good things come to those who wait is kind of the takeaway there. You know, there's a reason why you brew the microbes and wait a day with the aerated, actively aerated approaches. So, you know, neither extraction methods grows microbes. And the real potential of compost tea is that you're growing soil microbes beyond the capacity and population that nature would be able to do on our own. You know, we're not just receiving what nature gives us, we're actually moving beyond that and growing a population of microbes that couldn't happen naturally. And that's what allows us to play catch up. You know, that's what allows us to grow soil very, very quickly relative to the passive nature of how nature works. So the epitome of compost tea is actively aerated compost tea. It's AACT as it's known. This is where you're actually brewing the tea. And it's the act of growing microbes using compost or humus, aeration like you would in an aquarium, and organic fertilizers. You know, I say it a lot, but organic growing is about feeding microbes. And that is being concentrated deliberately in this process. It's a concentration of compost in the same way that compost is a concentration of soil, right? And that's really where the potential comes from. So you can see the visuals here. You know, a compost tea brewer can be as simple as a 5-gallon bucket, and, you know, it can be a commercial unit that would be 1,000 gallons large if you wanted to. You go swimming in it. So, you know, within that, this is kind of a little visual of the types of brewers. Just flesh that out a little bit. There's not a whole lot of development technologically or intentionally within the left example here of the bucket with the air stone and a sack of compost and some molasses. You can get a 1,000-gallon compost tea brewer with a larger aeration mechanism that's passive and aerating the water. That's really just a glorified bucket with an air stone in it. So I don't want to say discourage, but I question people that'll spend thousands and thousands of dollars on big buckets and air pumps and air stones. There's no benefit in doing that other than the size volume you can do on your own. And frankly, you can put that together yourself. On some level, you know, the Microbe Maker, I give you the visual. This is one way in which a brewer has differentiated itself from the conventional way of brewing tea. And it really involves treating water with more respect and making water wetter. And I'll explain that in a second. But it's not that you can't make a Microbe Maker by yourself either. It's not rocket science. It's a concept, not a product. But what you're doing in the Microbe Maker is you're creating implosion. And this implosion regenerates water. And when water is activated, when water is activated, it is more conducive to cellular penetration. You're going to deliver more fertility and oxygen into the cell, and you're going to take away more of what you don't want in the cells. And there's real significance to that. So what is implosion? Well, this image in the upper right here of the profile of an implosive vortex is what I mean. The pressure attained at the bottom peak of this vortex is pretty fierce. You know, there's a suction involved. There's a force generated that to keep it simple, because you can make it sound really complicated, it breaks the surface tension of water down measurably. You can take a source of water and float it, and before and after measure the difference in the surface tension. And what that means is water's not hugging itself so tightly. I'm trying to keep this on the surface and simple. And that allows the cell to access more of it through what are called aquaporins. And we'll talk about water down the road a little bit in great detail. But essentially what it means is there's a very deliberate way a cell needs to invite water to come in and be removed. And we can enhance that process by thinking more about what water wants. How often do we do that, right? Personify water and ask water what it wants. Well, what it wants is to move in the form of an implosive spiral vortex. This is why, we don't make a vortex in a microbe maker. We allow it. It's what happens down the drain of a bathtub. Raindrops spiral, waves curl, rivers meander. There's a lot of fluid dynamics there that are relevant and really off the radar of the agricultural conversation. And I expect to see that become more relevant. A lot of the farmers we deal with on large scale, water is their biggest liability and cost. So, ways that we can be more efficient with delivering this water, the better it can be. I saw a study this morning, I didn't include this in this presentation, about acetic acid vinegar and its benefits during drought conditions to plants. Real fascinating. Something I need to look a little bit more into, but the study that I saw was really compelling, and there was an image. I actually probably should have included it. Didn't think about it. Too fresh, but the bottom line is, there are ways to manage this, but we routinely see farmers cut 30%, 20-30% of their water bill out using compost tea and activated water, I should say. So here's a quick visual of a microbe maker, just so you can kind of see it work. You want to go full farmer, or maybe you have a lawn care company, retail garden center, or commercial nursery.
Or you can grow tomatoes in Colorado.
You want the Cadillac of compost tea brewers, Microbe Maker Compost Tea System. This is the big leagues.
This baby right here takes compost tea brewing to a whole new level.
Microbe Maker is a commercial brewing unit. We can show you how to brew perpetually, so you have living compost tea available on demand 24/7 for your plants and customers.
We create an implosive vortex that activates and moves water with air, increasing dissolved oxygen and oxygen retention. We like to say, we don't make a vortex, we allow it. Why do we say that again?
So that shows you a little bit about, how the brewer works. You can kind of follow the diagram for a second there if you'd like, but there's no water pumps involved in the circulation. It's all air driven. And that's significant because it doesn't churn the microbes up. It doesn't disrupt the integrity of the water. And it happens to enhance the amount of dissolved oxygen that you can accomplish in water, which is vital for growing microbes. The amount of oxygen is one of the limiting factors within the brew. The more oxygen, the more breathing, the more reproduction, the more population you're achieving. So, in an aerated bucket, you should be able to achieve 8 parts per million of the DO with a proper air pump. You can get that to 12, 13 parts per million. You can even do that with air pumps, actually. But one of the things that's really significant is that when you remove the aeration from the passive approach, that's just bubbling the water, and you remove the ability to circulate from the microbe maker, using the same volume of water in the same air pump, you're going to get higher DO in the microbe maker. But what's fascinating, and now again, not on the radar of the common compost tea conversation, is that the water, because it's conditioned, ideally, is going to increase the retention of DO over time. The molecular structure of the water is actually conducive to holding more dissolved oxygen longer. And that's relevant for transportation. It's relevant just from a general standpoint. The more air available, the better vitality you're going to get out of your tea. Really difficult to measure the actual, analytical benefits of that, and even the subjective benefits, because it would take a control and it would take, some fleshing out that I admittedly have not done. What I'm being driven here by is a DO meter that basically measures it comparatively. So DO is important in tea. And then, if there's any questions about that, obviously feel free to bring them up and we can discuss it in some more detail. But one of the things I want to try to do is bring some new ideas, and then towards the end, I'm going to answer some frequently asked questions, and we'll kind of see where we end up. But I wanted to bring this up because, if you're a grower at home, farmer, gardener, whatever it is that you're doing, you're typically going to do what's called batch brewing. It's kind of the only way to do it in terms of the 101 on the market in general terms. I owned a garden center for 15 years, and if you brew tea on Tuesday and you got to get everybody to show up on Wednesday or at least by Thursday to, you know, put the tea that you brewed into action from a business standpoint, you can't get everybody there on the right day. It's never going to happen. And you end up wasting more than you sell, and sometimes, and it's a real pain. You got to clean the brewer every week. So I invented this process called perpetual brewing that admittedly doesn't make a whole lot of sense for people that are growing at home. I mean, you should brew up some tea, do it again next week, right? Or at least by next month, and consistently apply it over time. It doesn't make sense to keep a compost tea brew going just to keep it going. But for a garden center that wants it available for their customers when they come in rather than a scheduled day of the week, there's really no other way to do it. And it's really simple. It's not revolutionary, even though it does revolutionize the business operation of it. But you're essentially treating it like a kombucha or a water kefir or something like that, where you've got, say, 30 gallons spinning there, and for every 5 gallons of water you can put into the unit to fill it back up at the end of the day, let's say it's 5 gallons. Put 5 gallons of water in, you put 1 unit of the 5-gallon recipe, and you keep the brew going. And so there's no weekly cleaning. Some compost tea approaches say put it in a refrigerator to maintain vitality. It will to some extent, but it doesn't really matter in the scheme of things. So no refrigerators, no wasting more than you sell. It's a good process for the garden center. It's a real educational tool. It's kind of a little business within your business, if you will. But the idea of being able to keep the brew going and clean it monthly instead of weekly, or I went sometimes brewing over a year at a time, never cleaning the unit. And the only reason we did is because it started to settle and slow the vortex down, the circulation down. So we just knocked the gunk out of it. But we've been doing this for, like I said, I've been doing it for 15 years in a business for almost that length of time. And never once have we had somebody, even with all the dealers that we have out around the country doing this, that have ever experienced a negative to their garden. So one of the things that's interesting to me within that is you got these rules, right? It's kind of where we started in this talk. And they're made to be broken. And what we're doing with perpetual brewing is breaking the rules. And the right and the wrong within that is how well it works for the people that are using it, right? Not whether the rule's being broken or not. So it's just a small example of how we pigeonhole ourselves in agriculture. We make our mind up. We decide there's only a certain number of elements we need to pay attention to, or a certain population or strain of microbe, and we're missing the forest for the trees, right? So I bring this up just, FYI, perpetual brewing is absolutely possible. Tell somebody to call me if they say it's not. And at the end of the day, the results generate the efficacy. Not are we, following the guidelines that are presented to us. So, my experience with all of this within Compost Tea is that, there are different ways of doing it. You really just need to make sense based on your application. Even when I ran a lawn care company with this, we'd had a 300-gallon brewer. We'd brew up 300 gallons, transfer it to the 300-gallon sprayer, go out and do the jobs. Before we left, we'd fill it back up with water, start the brew for the next day. So technically, we weren't adding to an existing brew. We were starting over right when we transferred the next batch. And that made sense operationally because we knew how much we needed to go out and do the jobs. So you can imagine in a garden center, you're not going to know how many people show up on that day. So trust you get the point. So perpetual brewing is real, but really only makes sense if you got a garden center. There's probably nobody out there. So, so this is something that comes up quite a bit. Let's call it intentional brewing. Part of the fascinating part about the food web is that it's dynamic. It's not a soluble salt that comes out in solution and you get what you got, right? You know exactly what it is. It's measured based on what the label says, and hopefully that lines up. It should. And you know exactly what you're working with. It's a very clinical and literal approach. When you're brewing compost tea, it's a little bit about like the Wild West, right? And within that, there's an ability to grow certain populations of microbes over others. And there is some relevance as to why you might want to do that. So I want to be careful not to say you don't need to pay attention to any of this. I'm bringing it up because it's relevant. But what it has the potential to do is create a seeming complexity within it that you could do it wrong. And you really can't do this wrong. It's really as simple as putting diverse microbes in the presence of air and some food and letting them grow. As you consistently apply them to your field or your soil, they're going to self-organize. What's not needed is going to get eaten. What is needed is going to repopulate and grow in the field. So you don't have to get real caught up in what's in your tea, other than diverse ingredients. Having said that, sugars like molasses, unrefined sugars, I should add, not, Dixie salt or sugar, excuse me, that's really refined. It doesn't really have the potential to grow microbes. But molasses is unrefined and has potential in it that can be digested and help the microbes replicate. And the result is the microbes pushing the molasses more towards ionic solubility so that it can be built back up into the living system. So sugars are going to grow more bacteria, kelp, fish, oats, woody materials, mulches, things like that, which wouldn't be conducive to brewing because they clog your sprayer up. But you can always filter it. But the point is, available fungal sources like those are going to encourage more fungi growth. We found that micronized feed hay encourages protozoa growth. The equisetum plant, horsetail plant, grows more nematodes. So that's pretty amazing, right? The book Teaming with Microbes that got brought up last week, which is a fantastic source to start with understanding the food web, gets into this quite a bit because it's interesting and it creates fodder for imagining the power and the dynamic nature of a food web. But it leaves people thinking, man, I could grow a fungal tea and it might hurt my plants, or this, that, and the other, right? You can imagine people's minds run wild. Am I doing this wrong? So part of what I like to project is that, let's simplify it. And in my experience, the more important thing is to be consistent about applying a total food web product rather than what microbe is present. So, you can get into things like, and I believe we referenced it somewhat last week, the first things that are going to start to repopulate are the bacteria, then come the fungi, then come the protozoa, and last are the nematodes. They wake up and put their feet on the ground last, let's say. So the reason you need to wait at least 12 hours is so all four of those trophic levels are active. So from 12 to 24 hours, you got bacterial dominance. After that, fungal dominance. Moving into the 36, 48-hour range, you're going to get the protozoa and the nematode dominance. So, in concept, if you wanted to grow more nematodes, which tend to be what's lacking in the majority in immature soil, there is some relevance to brew the tea longer. Are you doing it wrong if you only brew it for 13 hours? No. It's better best. So, again, happy to engage any kind of questions within that. I don't want to mitigate the interesting ideas within these concepts. I'm just trying to give you some depth and then back up a little bit and say, don't feel overwhelmed. It's just consistency of application is more important than the posture and population of your tea, assuming diverse ingredients. So you can kind of see this is fleshed out a little bit more. You can see some of those, what grow and ingredients down at the bottom. Get a lot of questions about recipes. I tend to kind of, underwhelm people with the complexity of my recipes because I think we've created a pretty good one from a company level. But I'd never claim it's the best. I don't think anybody ever could. And I'm always interested to learn more. So the best advice that I can give you is just, make sure that you're including diverse or not only organisms, but elements. That's the purpose of earth tonic. We'll talk about that in a second. Or rock dusts, or any kind of ionic diversity. Those are the enzyme potential of the microbes. And then the diversity of food sources. Rather than going to the buffet and all they got steak, let's get some vegetables, some salads. You get the analogy, right? The more they got to eat and the more diversity there is to draw from, the stronger the ingredient's going to be in the end. Strength and diversity. So, with that being said, here's some information for you. But, just don't end up with, it's not that it's wrong, but, an inferior tea relative to the potential would be your backyard compost you've never inoculated before with a known diverse source and some blackstrap molasses from the cupboard, right? If that's what you're doing, you're not hurting anything. You're not totally spinning your wheels. You are growing microbes because microbes reside everywhere. But without an inoculation, all the fish in the sea for your compost, and without a diversity of food source for them to do their thing, you're limiting the potential of the activity you're undertaking. So, again, trust that makes sense. So we saw a little video for Earth Compound last week. These are only a minute long, but we did watch that one last week. You can go watch it again if you'd like. I'm going to give you some examples of how we do it, and then you can kind of, ask some questions of how you might do it on your end. We add worm castings, two forms of organic and another of a biodynamic compost that has a farm-based natural diversity, archaea microbes, and then we influence that with biodynamic preparations that create a true biodynamic compost. So there's a lot of diversity in Earth Compound. It's a good mother for your compost pile. If you wanted to brew some tea up with this and then add that to your compost, then you check the box of diversity towards the potential that we're sitting here talking about. This is a side-by-side of a local farm that was using tea out of my garden center that was getting results on the left and hadn't used it on the right as a control, and they were pretty impressed with this. I mentioned Earth Tonic. Earth Tonic is a sea mineral fertilizer, so I'll let the short video here do some talking.
Earth Tonic is a seawater-based mineral catalyst that contains literally every form of every element on Earth. Not only does Earth Tonic provide total plant nutrition from mineral sources around the globe, it's a toolkit for microbes to make enzymes. Every element on the periodic table has an enzyme potential. Not having all the elements in your garden or compost tea brew is like hiring microbes to build a house and giving them half the tools. After all, why would Mother Nature make an element not needed in the garden? She wouldn't. Use Earth Tonic in your organic garden to supplement your base hydroponic fertilizer as a foliar spray and, of course, in your compost tea brewing. You can even drink this stuff. But don't. It tastes terrible.
Lost a little sink in there, but hopefully you get the point. This is a foliar spray of Earth Tonic versus a control. Some lettuce that we were growing in the store long ago. It's really difficult to burn plants with the balance of sea minerals. They're valuable beyond my ability to explain it, kind of like the food web. Why would Mother Nature make an element not needed in the garden or in the soil? And she really wouldn't. And in retrospect, I wish I'd swallowed that Earth Tonic just to give you the visual, because I've used it to remineralize my drinking water for about a decade. It's completely food grade. But anyway, it's one of the residual benefits of using the product is that it is a totally natural product, as are all our products. But I wouldn't eat any of the other ones, in fairness. So then you got the toolkit. That's what the elements are. It's kind of like the white sugar thing. Microbes aren't going to grow because it's refined. It's ionic in some respects, right? The microbes use the elements in Earth Tonic and in any organic fertilizer and soil environment to make the enzymes that catalyze the decomposition and perform the work of the chemical decomposition that's happening to make humus, which is plant food. And then it's on its way back up in a plant, and then it decomposes through the biological activity, and the breathing in and out goes on of the natural rhythm. So you got the microbes themselves, the tools that they use to make enzymes, and you got foods.
Earth Syrup is a premium crafted dry blend of organic nutrients. Molasses-based, Earth Syrup contains 12 beneficial plant and microbe ingredients, including fish, yucca, worm castings, rock dust, humates, whey, and more that provide abundant and diverse food sources for feeding plants and soil microorganisms. Earth Syrup is micronized below 500 micron for maximum solubility and availability to the garden. It's a fine powder, so it helps to dissolve in water before application. Use Earth Syrup directly in the garden as an amendment to custom soil mixes or a microbe food in compost tea. Earth Syrup is sweet treats for the garden. No, it may not work for the pancakes, but trust me, the plants and microbes will love this stuff.
So you can see, all these ingredients can be used individually. What we're doing with tea recipes is bringing different ingredients together in order to grow the capacity in a more concentrated manner. And you can see here, this is an okra plant I was growing in my backyard years ago, and control versus on the left and not on the right. So there's all sorts of residual benefits you get from this outside of being able to grow the microbes, such as enhancing the availability of the material that you're using in the first place. Earth kelp's the other ingredient we use in our core recipe.
Earth kelp is a premium blend of cold-pressed Ascophyllum nodosum and Eclonia maxima sea kelps, formulated at up to 3 times the concentration of other leading kelp brands. What? Ascophyllum nodosum and Eclonia maxima. Huh? Okay, calm down. It's only seaweed. Liquid kelp is seaweed that has undergone a process to extract the active ingredients from inside the cell wall of the plant, so that it's soluble and available to your garden. Cheap kelps are extracted using heat and harsh chemicals.
But earth kelp is cold pressed and extracted using a patented cellular infusion process. Plus, we add micronutrients from sea minerals for elemental diversity.
Use earth kelp to stimulate microbes in compost tea, as a foliar spray, or as a plant tonic in any growing application.
So again, this is earth kelp. Actually, this is a clone plant. And the other one is not a control. It's actually using another competitive kelp. Kelps are interesting. Most liquid kelp products come from the same place, from the same kelp meals. The difference is, as the video described, in how they're extracted. And the result is, is it harsh chemicals or heat, one hand, and then the other factor is the concentration of the kelp solids within the product that you're purchasing. And that's one of the reasons why liquid kelp is so widely variable on the market. You got some that have less and others that have more, and our approach to that is concentration. So you can see that playing out in the result that you get here. But again, earth kelp can be used on its own, but it can also be used as part of the tea recipe. And just to connect that to some DIY on your side, I, as usual, I'm not here to sell products. This is just the information that I have available to get the content across. But if you're brewing tea on your end, just source things that create diversity of microbes, of elements, ionic elements as tools, and then food sources, and you'll be in a real good spot. So you can see the benefits that it brought. I believe we took a look at this last week, and I wanted to show you. Again, this one's kind of amazing. You can actually see the soil that was being grown here. We didn't bring any soil into this area. This is after 8 months of aggressively approaching it with tea. So you grow the soil while you grow the plant, as opposed to just growing the plant and degenerating the soil. Which would you choose? That's basically the question that we're asking here. Now, there's different ways to the same place, but the principles still apply. So I want to give you just a couple of excited people that were using it, just to kind of show you some different context that wasn't from me.
My name is Paulette, and I have a plant that's a gardenia plant. It's bonsai, and bonsais are hard to keep alive. And I've been struggling for a good year now, trying to keep this plant alive. And I put this tea in it, and one time, and I have a whole new rejuvenated plant. It is so beautiful, and the leaves are thick and really, really green, and I'm really amazed, and I'm so thrilled and happy. I had to come back for more.
Paul, that's a trip. She had no idea what she was doing when I think it was her neighbor told her to come in. But the proof is in the pudding. So you can rest assured she wanted to know more after she'd started to use it. And that's really the power of this stuff, have an experience with it. This one's interesting as well.
My name's Richard. I'm using the compost tea, mostly in containers, and I'm just having magical results. I've got nasturtiums with leaves that big around, like I've never had before, and everything else is just going great.
So he was a believer, and this is a lawn care one, I believe.
This tea works great. My neighbor used it, and I saw the brown spot in his yard turn green. I put it in my backyard. Everything's doing great. Definitely improvement in my lawn, and I started using it on my potted plants, and they're thriving. That's about all I can say about it. It's great.
So would you recommend it?
I would highly recommend it, yeah. It's
Very
been
cool.
worthwhile.
So you've seen like more luscious growth? Like what other things?
Greener, there were brown spots, and they turned green within a week. They started greening up, seeing new growth coming up in the lawn, and then my potted plants are flourishing. They're doing really well.
That's awesome, man. Thank you.
So yeah, we got a lot more where those come from, but it's really rewarding when you can introduce somebody to a new concept. They're as excited as the people were over the years. So give it a whirl. You won't be disappointed. So we got about 15 minutes left, and I wanted to walk you through some frequently asked questions. First one being, how do you brew it? Well, you might have surmised how to do that. This is not entirely complicated, but here's kind of some word step-by-steps. Get your materials together. Best practices are to aerate the water an hour before adding the ingredients to dechlorinate. That only works when you have actual chlorine in your water and not chloramines, which do not off-gas. They need to be filtered. The question becomes, what if I have chloramines? or I don't aerate the water an hour before, or let it sit out passively for a day before you use it without the air pump. And in my experience, there's never a time in which not to brew the tea. You're never really gonna defeat the purpose of, based on the population of microbes we're talking about here. It's not gonna help the tea at all to have chlorine. That's the point of chlorine in city water systems, is to mitigate the microbes that might occur. But that's a passive population relative to what we're doing aggressively in aerated compost tea. So never a reason not to do it. If you can, use some rainwater. That's the best one. I wish you could be here now. I keep looking out the window because I hadn't seen it rain like this in a long, long time. It's just kind of a trip. But the point is, the cleaner the water, the better, always. Add your ingredients. You can make up your own recipe, or you can follow, a standard recipe from a supplier. Ensure the solubility of all the ingredients. I tend to, as we talked about last week, I don't like to filter it up front. I like to filter it after I've brewed it. It's my preference. I don't like to put compost in a bag and aerate it. I like it to be free within the solution. And then brew it for at least 12 hours and really no more than 48. I typically say 12 to 24 hours. And people say, well, what if it rains and I can't use it? Should I add more ingredients? You're kind of in the gray area there. Yeah, no. I mean, is it going to be dead within 48 hours? Absolutely not. Is it going to be as alive at 48 hours as it was at 12? Really difficult to measure with any kind of authority. And if you feel like the tea's old, trust your gut. Add some more ingredients in there. There are people that'll tell you can add too many ingredients relative to microbes because the microbes grow to really high populations and then they consume all the oxygen and there's die off. Intellectually that makes sense. I can't tell you I've ever seen anybody verify that. So again, another small window into the seeming authority of the compost microbial world, compost tea microbial world, and a lack of follow through. And I'm not blaming people. I'm carrying the burden of proof on some level too, right? So just transparency there. So how do you use compost tea? Well, this one is important because the mindset that I see people tend to have when they ask that question is, from a fertilizer mindset. You can overuse a fertilizer and kill your plant. And if not kill it, burn it significantly. Everybody's done it. It's just reversing the osmotic gradient of the root and sucking water out of the plant because more ions outside the root than in. Transpiration happens when the more ions in the root than out. That's why different plants have different capacities for the amount of fertilizer that they can enjoy. Once you breach the tipping point of its capacity to transpire healthily, you're moving the water in the opposite direction, the edge of the leaf burn. That doesn't apply, at least with our compost tea recipe. And again, I'm referencing ours again because we intentionally put it together to be about 400 parts per million in clean water. You're not going to burn anything, a seedling, a house plant, whatever it is, a complete concentrate. As long as you're not overwatering the plant, you really can't hurt the plant. Now, if you made a recipe with bat guano, fish, and some higher NPK type fertilizer materials, place for doing that, right? But you got to keep in mind the fertilizer concentration to not burn your plant. So what that would mean is you might have to dilute it in order to use it, which means you're adding less microbes per area, right? So the way we put our recipe together was to be able to be aggressive with the population of microbes as opposed to having to follow the fertilizer concentration. So to speak from our recipe, which is really the only thing I have authority to speak from without the experience, we recommend about 1 gallon per 500 square feet. That's about 80 gallons an acre. Typically what you water in if you used a watering can on a raised bed. I've got people that use 1 gallon in 50 square feet to 5 square feet. It's not gonna matter. And there's probably a point at which you're adding enough microbes, and I can't really tell you where that is either, unfortunately. So you just basically want to kind of round out how much solution you need to approach what you're applying towards. Let's say it's a 4x8 raised bed, and you need 4 gallons of solution. Well, if you're brewing up 5 gallons of tea, you're golden. Let's say you got 4 of them, and you need 16 gallons. You're only brewing 5 gallons of tea. Well, then take your 5 gallons, dilute it in 11 gallons of water, create the 16 gallons, and there's your rotation. There's no harm in diluting, but you want to use the tea as concentrated as the application allows, if that makes sense. So again, feel free to ask some specific questions towards your applications if you want. On agriculture, you tend to have a little bit more of a keener eye on cost benefit. You're running a business. You're not just trying to eat some food out of your garden. So, you're going to look at the bottom line in a little bit of a different way. You're also going to have application costs that you wouldn't have with a watering can and your time in a garden. You tend not to think about paying yourself for the amount of time you're out in the garden. Most people, it's therapy. So, you know, in agriculture, you know, with that in mind, you tend to use anywhere from 20 to 40 gallons an acre, you know, say monthly. So you can imagine, you know, in a garden, if you could do that weekly at at 80 gallons an acre, you're going to make a lot more progress quicker. But it's not wrong in either capacity. You just have to kind of do the business model and live within the parameters. So, you know, you can apply this with tractor sprayers through fertigation as long as you're filtering it appropriately. It was more important on scale. Not, it's annoying on a small scale, but it can cost you real money on a large scale. So you really need to kind of go through the motion one time to make sure that your process is conducive to what you're trying to do. But, you know, again, it's important to remember compost tea is not defined. You know, I mentioned that in the previous screen where, you know, our recipe may be one thing and it's called compost tea, and your recipe may be something totally different with a lot of bat guano in it that is still called compost tea, right? It's the limitations of language. So, you know, with that understanding, there's a lot of variability of which you can use tea. It's just you want to use it as a concentrate as the application allows in the end. So skip one there. Here's just some detail. I'm not going to read through all of this, but you can reference this presentation if you wanted some starting points. Keep in mind this is for our recipe, and it's begging detail from the extent that people are going to ask for it. You could use in all of these applications straight up compost tea and wouldn't hurt anything. So I don't want you to take this as right and wrong again. Hopefully I've made that point. But people ask questions, and it's important to provide answers and a starting point for conversation. So I wanted to, you know, something comes up a lot. I'm not sure why that's so quick there. People, can I use compost tea in hydroponics? There's a pretty healthy dialogue out there about how compost tea doesn't work in hydroponics. And that's absolutely not the case. I like to say that it's the most important place to use compost tea. And you can see here one of the reasons why. This was a sickly water culture hydroponic environment that was given compost tea, and after some pruning in 48 hours, the roots were in much better position. And the microbes, the beneficial diverse microbes in a good tea recipe are going to eat the disease that's running out of check. It's not unlike the feedlot situation I was telling you earlier. The conditions bring the disease, not contamination. So when you introduce diverse microbes, you get a balance that keeps everything from running out of population, which is really what a disease is. It's an organism that's thriving in inferior conditions that has nothing to eat it. So we can correct the conditions, but once the disease has expressed itself, you can't make it go away, right? And that's one of the things that compost tea can work really well. So you can see here's another example. This was a sickly scenario, different grower, same container, different angle. And you can see this, he's saying after 2 or 3 days, this is the pearly white roots popping out of his hydroponic system that looked like it was on its way to dying before. So again, compost tea can encourage regeneration of roots and mitigate disease quite effectively. It also works as a clearing solution. It's going to unlock all the salts that might build up from the salt-based nutrients you typically use in a hydroponic application. So there's not an incompatibility there. Admittedly, the salts aren't helping the microbes, but you're not trying to set up a food web in your compost tea system, in your hydroponic system, like you would in the earth in your landscape, for example. You're typically just looking to prevent disease, to cycle nutrients and work as a clearing solution, and then deliver residual trace elements and micronutrients that wouldn't typically come from the base hydronutrient, which is no more than 17 elements. Our tea recipe has over 90 elements, for example. So you can see, you're getting, it's like a 3-for-1 at least. So, arguably the most important place to do that is in hydroponics. You can combine the yield benefits of hydro with the qualitative benefits of organics in a very efficient and concentrated way. And it also provides growth benefits. This is the root development of a cloned jalapeno plant. It was a senior project of a past staff member on at my garden center. And he, cloned a plant, put two hydro systems next to each other under the same light, the same environment, added a cup per gallon of the tea on the right, not the left. And you can see, I can't remember how long this was, but the plant was mature enough to be growing through the bottom. And, quite a big difference there. So how often do you use compost tea? I keep this simple. Use it at least once a month. Don't use it any more than once a week. Are you wrong or right outside of that? No. But, again, you got to give an answer. And there's a big difference between farming and gardening. We kind of fleshed that out a minute ago. If you got a raised bed and you're a hobby grower, gardening is a different scale and endeavor than if you got 100 acres, right? You got to go buy a tractor. You got to do the whole business end of things. So, just keep that in mind and follow the logic. You really can't do this wrong. Just be as consistent as you can and as concentrated as you can. Should you get a microbe test? Those are available. Soil Food Web's a very reputable outlet. Microbes in My Soil in New Mexico is another good one. Nino will take care of you over there. And, you know, there's a lot of really cool things you can learn and discover in doing that. They are more expensive than soil tests for minerals. And, you know, again, back to that idea of, you know, do we want to try to figure out what's in our tea or see how well it works? And I'll let you choose the path. I don't want to discourage you from doing Soil Food Web activity. But really, all you're going to do if you discover deficiencies is brew tea and do it anyway. So I always say, well, with the benefit that you get, why don't you just get to doing it, right? But, you know, don't want to stand in anybody's way that has interest there. So if you have questions about microbe tests, I'm happy to engage them as well. You know, this is an interesting one. How long do microbes live? Well, and it's good. It came up a lot in our garden center because people got the mindset, well, it's alive. And, you know, do I have to speed home? And the answer is no. You know, don't change your speed. You know, but don't draw off it like a quart bottle of fertilizer you bought from the garden center over the next month either. You know, after a day or 2 days, it's not going to be alive. In 3-4 days, it's going to be dead. So, you know, does that make the product harmful? No, it just means it's not alive and you're not getting the benefit that you could residually out of it. And that's really what, you know, is unique about compost tea. You can't buy reproductive microbes on any kind of diverse stance out of a bottle. It's just not part of the process. A lot of products made with microbes that are bottled for the nutritional capacity of it, which again justifies the activity of compost tea, but it's not going to replace the fresh requirement of growing that microbe and applying them when they're hungry and repopulating. So we'll just kind of handle a couple more here, and I imagine maybe there's some others, and we're happy to engage them. But, you know, we talked about chlorine. Chlorine kills microbes, but it won't kill all your microbes. Having said that, filter your water if you can, right? Does temperature influence compost tea? Yes and no. There is relevance to the higher the hotter the temperature, the greater the biological growth. The flip to that is the greater the temperature, the less oxygen can be dissolved in solution. So, you know, anywhere from, I'd say, 90 to 60 is kind of the sweet spot. Anything outside of that, you know, starts to ding the potential. The other thing to think about is if you've got a 90 degree, let's say it's 70 degrees in your house, and you're wanting to use it at the beginning or the end of your winter growing season, or, you know, the beginning of spring when it's real cold where you live. Well, it's kind of like you want to harden off your microbes. I would encourage you to brew the microbes in the temperature you're going to use them in, rather than make it, you know, real cush for them on an indoor environment and then take them out into the elements. That's my opinion. I can't tell you that I've justified that through testing, but it does make sense. So that would be my recommendation on that. Water pumps typically don't kill microbes on a single pass. I can't see that they do under the microscope. I intuit that it does if you recirculate them over and over and over. No proof. The only proof that I've ever seen of something mechanical killing microbes is the size of the orifice that it's being sprayed through. Typically, spraying system on scale aren't an issue. And if you're not above 90 PSI, the pressure is not going to be a problem, which is typically the case. But like a hand sprayer, like a little $2 cheap spray bottle, actually has a real small orifice, kind of like putting your thumb on the end of a hose to kind of create the pressure to spray it out. The size of that can rip microbes up. You can see it under the microscope. So, you know, just keep that in mind and try to mitigate, you know, the type of environment you're running your microbes through the best you can within that. And then, you know, another one that comes to mind is, do artificial fertilizers kill microbes? Well, we just saw the benefit that you get out of those hydroponic applications. All of them were being grown with artificial fertilizers. So, you know, they're not going to kill microbes directly. You know, another way to think about that is, as long as you're not burning your plant with the concentration you're delivering, you're probably not harming the microbes. And I say probably because it's really difficult to get down there and verify these types of questions on a micro scale. But you know, rest assured, it's not helping your microbes. But if you do need to use artificial fertilizers or want to use artificial fertilizers, just keep in mind that, you know, it's not helping your microbes. It's just not defeating the purpose either, right? So that's what I wanted to get across today. This is a simple process. Hopefully I didn't make it too complicated. You know, encourage life, not death. That's kind of a, you know, a good takeaway from a general posture of organic growing and growing living plants. You know, it's kind of a trip how we artificial processes within a living environment, and just get started doing it, you know. And frankly, it works. It's not a matter of if it works, it's how it works in the soil. And when you see the results, you get a lot more excited about it, and then, you know, you go tell the next person. So appreciate your attention, and besides, if you're there, any questions, I'm happy to engage them if I can.